Thanks for that wonderful introduction, Rex. We all know I'm not the best professor at the business school because my office was next door to Gene Fama's, but I'll take the compliment anyway. I want to talk tonight about growth. Economic growth is, I think, the important policy issue facing America and the American economy, largely ignored, and we need to pay more attention to it. And I've been thinking about what kind of policies we need and how to frame that in a nonpartisan or bipartisan way so that things can actually get done. So I have to remember, don't put the punchline of the joke up before you tell the joke. So as we start to think about economics, here's my little quiz for you, which that graph answered. So which is the better economy, the one we've had the last 8 years or the 1950s? You read the New York Times and think the 1950s, this is kind of this hazy, wonderful view, strong growth rates, right? Lots of employment, all those good jobs. Well, people who write at the New York Times never actually worked in a factory, so they don't know what a union factory job was like. But okay, lots of good jobs, especially if you were white and male, not so good if you weren't, but lots of good jobs, middle class. I'm trying to seduce you into how great the 1950s were, right? So let's look at, here's the facts. This is real gross domestic product per capita. It's sort of the easiest measure of how well off is the average American. It's in real terms, $2,009, so I took out inflation. And you can see in 1950, $16,000 per capita. Whereas now, $50,000 per capita. We are 3 times better. The average American is 3 times better off than he or she was in the 1950s. It's not even close. 3 times better off now. Levels matter. Long-term growth is what matters. And this graph even understates the huge progress since the 1950s because you and I are far better off than our parents and grandparents in the 1950s. And it's not just because we have 3 1952 Chevys in the front yard instead of 1. Well, I'm actually kind of at the age where a 1952 Chevy in the front yard sounds like a pretty cool thing to have. But if you need to drive somewhere and reliably, a modern, boring Toyota is in fact immensely better than a 1952 Chevy. We don't have 3 1952 black and white TVs, the kind where you turn the knob instead of 1. We don't have 3 1952 doctors instead of 1. Everything we have is just so much better than it was then. And health is better. The environment is better. The length of life is better. All sorts of stuff that just isn't measured in GDP. And I'm trying to get you to realize how important growth is. The economic question for our times is, do we do that again from 2000 to 2050? Or does that process slow down or end? Now, when we're talking about that, nothing else that we're talking about comes close to that change in the living standards of the average American. That's the good news. Now, let's look at the bad news. Notice what happened recently, and let's look into the recent trends here. Now, here I did something. I put, this is on a log scale. By the way, a little shout out to Jim here. Those of you in the biz will notice the Fred. The St. Louis Fed is this wonderful website that lets you make graphs like this very quickly. And that's where all this data and the graphs come from. Not the trend line, I did that on my own. So Fred will let you put it on a log scale. No, Jim, you can only put logs here. I want to have actual dollars here on the log scale. The point of the log scale is that on this log scale, you can't see the actual dollars, but a steady line is a constant rate of growth. So it lets you see if growth rates are speeding up or slowing down. And this is just an artistic line. It's not any fancy statistical technique. But you can see what happened. In 1980, there was a severe recession. What happened after the severe recession in 1980? Well, there was a strong period of catch-up growth. See, the problem with talking about growth in the abstract is you forget that once you go down, it's kind of easy to come back up quickly. February in St. Louis is a time of rapid temperature increase, though not necessarily a time of, when you want to go out and get a tan. Certainly Chicago was that way. I almost thought. So in 1980, there's a rapid period of growth to bring us back to the previous trend line, and then we turn the long trend line. Notice what started happening in 2000, we kind of started edging off. Every recession beforehand, we kind of come back up to this trend line, and then in the Great Recession, we lost 10 percentage points, and we never got that period of rapid catch-up growth. So we just lost that apparently forever. And worse, the big news here, let's see if I can push the right button. Probably not. I'll just point to it. No. The big bad news is notice that the trend line has now gotten flatter. We seem to be growing permanently at like 1.5% rather than like 3%. The growth rate is cutting in half. Now, if that continues, if over the next 50 years we're growing at 1.5% rather than 3%, that sounds like a little percent, but that adds up to a huge difference in the living standards for our children. If we had grown like 1.5% since 1950, the average American would be sitting on $26,000 a year, not $52,000 a year. So we're talking about doubling or not doubling the average American's living standard in the next 50 years. This next graph is the potential GDP, which it's a triangle to get away from the short-term fluctuations. Shows you the same thing in growth rates. Used to be 3.5%. Now we're down. These are the CBO's forecasts. The CBO thinks we're going to get all the way back up to a stoking 2% growth rate. But that's already a tragedy. It needs to be back up to 3% if we're going to do this thing again that we did before. So the difference between 1.5% and 3% growth just overwhelms anything else. And it's, let's think about anything else you want, not just the welfare of the average American. You want to pay off the national debt? There's just one thing that determines whether we'll do that or not, and that's economic growth. Because tax revenue is tax rate times income. And the way taxes work in this country is they can talk about whatever tax rate they want. The federal government takes in about 20% of GDP. More GDP, more tax revenue, pay off the debt. Less GDP, less growth, less tax revenue, here comes the debt crisis. You want to pay for Social Security, you want to pay for Medicare, you want to pay for the environment, you want to pay for defense, you want to pay for just about anything. We need that growth to come back up. Because over 10 to 20 years, that's what does it. And really nothing else matters but all that we talk about. When we're talking about stuff in Washington, they're talking about all sorts of stuff. Now, I spend my professional life worrying about monetary policy, as does Jim. Frankly, over 10 to 20 year horizons, monetary policy has nothing to do with growth. I'm probably the first economist in history to come tell you that the thing I spend my professional life on is irrelevant to the big picture. But the big picture is fiscal policy, stimuluses, even minimum wage. Does Uber get to come? Things like that just really don't add up to it. Now, where does growth come from? Why is growth slowing down? That is the question for our time. And I have to be honest here that I have my opinions, but not all academics agree. And I think there's three clear stories for why has that happened, why is that tailing off, and what's our chances for getting it to go back up again. So the first story that is epitomized by a great book by economist Robert Gordon at Chicago. I'm sorry, Northwestern. I shouldn't take credit for Chicago versus Northwestern is kind of like Cubs versus White Sox. You got it. That one. So Gordon's in Northwestern. He wrote this great book saying basically growth is over. And the reason is, according to Bob, is we ran out of ideas. He's a little older than me, and he remembers when they were promising us hoverboards and jetpacks, and he says, all I got is Twitter. My jetpack, here's my rocket to Mars. Where is, to be honest, the great inventions of the 20th century, the washing machine, the car, and so forth? Twitter's just nothing like that. Well, I now live in the Silicon Valley, and let me tell you, the idea that we've run out of ideas just doesn't make any sense. The second view of what's going on is secular stagnation. Larry Summers is, I think, the biggest proponent of this. Everything is fine with the economy, say these two theories, except for one, we ran out of ideas. Two, there's just not enough demand perpetually. So to Larry, what we need to do is just borrow a ton of money and blow it. Now when you get down to the equations of secular stagnation, it doesn't matter if you build infrastructure that you need, or whether you build a high-speed train from Tonopah to Winnemucca, which is sort of what we do on the West Coast, or it's just the borrowing and the spending that gets it going. What we need is a big blowout. Eternal lack of demand. Well, I don't think that adds up either. Because fundamentally in economics, long-term growth comes from one and only one place, and that's productivity. How much can the average person do per hour? You and I are not wealthier than our grandparents because, say your grandparent, what did our grandparents or grandparents do? Great-grandparents. He's probably, working with a shovel in a mine or something of the sort. Now why are you better off than a great-grandfather who was working with a shovel in a mine? Well, not because he worked 12 hours and you worked 14. Not because more of the family is in the mine shoveling. Not because the government came in and made Rockefeller, the owner of the mine, pay you higher wages, but because modern mine workers work with bulldozers. Or actually, I said this once in a blog post, the guy corrected me. They don't work with bulldozers anymore. They work with these huge machines that have a special name that I got wrong. And you and I do other things. Technology, better ideas incorporated in new businesses, more productivity is what generates growth. So ideas generate growth. Over the long run, it's hard to believe that lack of demand is the problem. So the third option, I think, is that process of getting new ideas, implementing new ideas in new businesses is grinding to a halt. And it's grinding to a halt because of what you read in the papers. An onslaught of law and regulation. It's just so hard to get anything done in America anymore because it's so hard to get the permits. Because it's not just having the idea, you have to build the new company. And all of economic regulation is designed to stop growth. So Uber is a great growth-enhancing idea. What Uber does is it lets people who couldn't otherwise work well, it gives them something to do. It gives you and me better, cheaper rides. Productivity goes up, stuff gets cheap. That's how we do it. And look what our cities do. They try to keep it out. Pretty much everywhere. New growth is always uncomfortable. A&P came in and kicked out the mom and pop stores, and they were unhappy. And then they were hurt. This is a painful process, but we got cheaper stuff. And then Walmart came in and kicked out the A&Ps. And the A&P was unhappy, and they got hurt. And then their employees lost stuff, but we got cheaper stuff. And now Amazon is, going to get rid of Walmart. And this process goes on, and it's intensely painful. And everyone goes to Washington to slow it down, which Washington does a lot. Now, of these three theories, let's have some evidence. When I say this to friends who believe in the other theories, they say, oh, John, you and your regulations, you've been reading the Wall Street Journal again. I talk to my buddies, they're not complaining about regulation. So yeah, well, your buddies are still in business. Let's talk to the guy who isn't in business anymore. So I was looking for a way to kind of quantify, is this a first-order problem or is this a third-order problem? So I want to show you that quantification. So I'm going to use the World Bank Ease of Doing Business rankings, which I cleverly made so small that none of you has any hope of reading it. But this is just a broad brush measure of how easy is it to do small business in the country. Now, of course, small business is nice, but big business is most of business. But still, countries where it's hard to run a small business are also countries where it's hard to run a big business. If you need to bribe someone to get the zoning variance to start a hot dog stand, you're probably going to be bribing someone to build a car factory too. Now, so it's things like ease of dealing with construction permits, getting electricity, registering property, so on and so forth. You might be surprised to learn that the U.S. is not the best at all of these things. We think of ourselves as free market paradise. In fact, we're not. The United States, where is the United States? I can see because I'm up here. Here's the United States. We're only number 7 on the overall ranking. Behind such free market libertarian nirvanas as Denmark and New Zealand. Now, why is that? We're actually pretty dismal at stuff like starting a business, 49, dealing with construction permits, 33, getting electricity, 44. We're great at getting credit. Number two. The one thing where I think the U.S. is arguably a little bit too good at. That gives you a sense of what this ease of doing business index measures. So here is a graph, ease of doing business. This is it's an index, and 100 represents in each. You could get 100, and if each category your policies were equal to the best actually observed in some country in the last, I think it's 10 years. So this is not dreamland. 100 is just nobody has 100 because nobody's actually done all the best in the same country. But if you had the best actually done in each country, you got 100. So here's the U.S. Our ranking's 82 overall. I brought China is about the mid-60s, and India is about 50. On the vertical axis is income per capita from the unbelievable tragedy of the Central African Republic, $320 per capita, and the distinction of being the worst country in the entire world to do business, up through India, China, and the US. And you can see, this is really rough. This isn't an economic study, it's just a graph I made for Wall Street Journal. But you can see even at that level, there's a strong correlation between the ease of doing business and GDP per capita. If you get out of the way, a lot of economic growth can happen. What's even more surprising is the numbers. So again, if you read the newspapers, China's doing better, it's taking over. No, thank you. China, 62 ease of doing business, about $7,000 per GDP per capita. We're way ahead of China. This is a long scale. We're $52,000. We're way ahead of China as our ease of doing business. What's interesting is how small changes in the ease of doing business correlate with enormous changes in income per capita. So my thought is, well, what's amazing about this is how much government interference can hurt an economy. Going from the U.S. to China to India, we're going down dramatically in people's standard of living, and that's correlated with ease of doing business. So conversely, maybe you think America's perfect, but maybe we have room for improvement. If we have room for improvement, then improvements in the ease of doing business, improvements in that sand in the gears regulation could make a big difference to growth. So for a calculation, suppose let's just go to Frontier. Now Frontier, when I do my policy stuff, it's kind of, or if you read, I don't know about Show Me's a little more practical. Cato is sort of, which cloud of free market nirvana should be on. We're not talking about, Cato Institute. We're just talking about, maybe I'll put Show Me here. Reasonable stuff that other countries have actually done. Let's put all those together, and what do you get? You get $300,000 per year. So now I don't know if you can go that far out, but if you extrapolate any bit at all, improvements in the ease of doing business, improvements in that regulatory environment can make a huge difference, I think, in growth. Now you might say, oh, John, as many people do, that's ridiculous. There's no way that making business easier can give a factor of 7 rise in people's incomes. Was there ever a country that just got out of the way and saw a factor of 7 rise in people's incomes? Answer, yes, there was. China. China in the mid-1990s decided to get out of the way. So how did China get rich? They did not have a massive stimulus program. They didn't have a Federal Reserve that artfully changed their interest rates up 22 basis points and down 17 basis points at just the right time. Our Fed may be doing a good job, but that's not what did this, a factor of 7 improvement in people's standard of living in the course of a decade. They just got a little bit out of the way. And if you had seen the data up to here and didn't know the U.S. was out there, you would say that's idiotic, that's impossible. We'll never go from like the Middle Ages to the 20th century in a decade. Yet they did it. So let's talk about policy. This is a discouraging time to follow American economic policy, but I want to argue that it is in fact a hopeful time. When parties blow up is times when fundamental changes are possible. You may not see it in the debate that's coming later this weekend. Actually, I probably doubt that you're going to see reasoned, careful, thoughtful economic policies laid out. But such things exist. A group of us at Hoover, led by Secretary George Shultz, put together a group of essays, which I'm here to plug. All academics are here to plug their books, and my own essays too. I'm impressed. I've been reading the Paul Ryan Better Way plan. You want to read a thoughtful plan with lots of details about how we can fix stuff. That is one, which I think we'll hear about more after the presidential election is over. So this is a moment, in fact, of great promise when fundamental changes could be done. So what I do, let me give you a little hint of my current project. Most people write the book first and then come give the talk. I do it the other way around. I find talking and then hearing from people is very useful for me to put the ideas together. So I've written a lot of essays about economic policies that would help, and let me give you kind of an overview of what I think we do. Now the challenge, our economic policy, our national economic discussion it's like a bad marriage that's gone on too long. And she says, "You're leaving your socks on the floor again." He says, "Well, you've been talking to your mother all the time." And it's just not going anywhere. And we're stuck in the same way. That many of the Republicans are sort of stuck in 1980 language, just louder and louder. Lower taxes, less regulation. Okay, I think that's about right, but it's not getting anywhere. Yelling louder, and a lot of the Democrats seem stuck in about the 1930s, more alphabet agencies doing stuff like that. And they yell louder too. So both sides are just yelling louder, and they're yelling more and more base-pleasing insults as opposed to actual policies. I attended one where one side said, "We need lower taxes to put more money in people's pockets." And they said, "No, we just want tax cuts for the rich." It's not getting anywhere. So I'm looking for policies that actually are innovative and will solve the problem, along with a way of listening to both sides and crafting things that will work. So I got a long list here, which I will not. You are glad to know you won't be here till 10 o'clock by the time I get through that list. But I want to give you some sense of that. I think this is possible, and that policies that appeal to both sides and that just ignore that right-left, Jane, you ignorant slut sort of thing that we've done. Most of you aren't old enough. That was a Saturday Night Live from the 1970s. All right, so regulation. The tired argument goes, more regulation. The businesses are getting away with murder. No, deregulation. We need less because the government's slowing everything down. Well, we got to get it. And in fact, when you look at modern regulation, the problem is not too much or too little. The problem is the structure of modern regulation. Some examples. A lot of regulation. So I fly for fun, so I get to know the FAA. I've actually read a bunch of federal regulations, the CFR that applies to pilots, and bless the old FAA, the rule book's about that thick, it's 20 years out of date, it's obscenely complicated. Last time I met with the FAA, we spent 3 hours about that I actually have the right little placards on my airplane. But if you read you can read the rules, you know what you have to do, you follow the rules, it is a rule. Most regulation isn't like that. Financial regulation, EPA, Food and Drug Administration, you kind of, there's this big long rule book, nobody knows what it means, so you kind of ask for permission, and then a year or 2 years or 5 years or never later, they tell you whether they'll grant you their permission. It's become arbitrary, it's become discretionary, it's become arbitrary, it's become more and more politicized. Regulations are being used to go after people who don't support what they're supposed to support. So we can get around them more or less and say, look, we need to fix the structure of regulation. How is regulation made? Are we doing cost-benefit analysis? In regulation, you've lost a lot of rule of law. If a prosecutor accuses you of a crime, you have the right to cross-examine the witness and see the evidence against you. In administrative courts by regulatory agencies, they are prosecutor, judge, jury, executioner, and recipient of the fine, all rolled into one. Well, we can fix the structure of regulation, and I think that'll produce better things not argue more or less. Health and finance, the two big regulatory concerns of our time, of course, are the ACA, which is at least financially imploding before us, and the Dodd-Frank Act, which is also imploding, but it's so hard to understand that nobody knows that, and we'll have to wait for the next crisis to figure it out. Both have simple answers. Now, I think one of the basic principles is American public life has gotten vastly too complicated. We're trying to do way too much. It's like a hoarder house. And we need to cut down to the few simple things that government actually can do. And I think in both cases there are very simple approaches that solve the problem. In healthcare, it's interesting, we keep arguing about who's going to pay for it, but we're not arguing about the most important thing, which is who's going to supply it and how. You walk into a hospital and they won't tell you the prices for stuff. Now, what is up with that? You walk into airlines is better there. You walk in there and you say, how much to take you to Chicago? They'll tell you how much it is to take you to Chicago. Only an industry horrendously protected from competition will they not tell you the prices. And that's what we really need is supply competition. Let new doctors come in, let new hospitals come in to compete for your business. That I think is that's always, supply competition is always what gives you better service and drives prices down. Financial regulation, if banks were just playing with their money and not with borrowed money guaranteed from the federal government, we wouldn't need to send a whole army of regulators out to try to make sure they don't lose money. What we've done with banks is it's like your cousin, like your brother-in-law Luigi goes to Vegas and loses a lot of money and embarrassed to bail him out. And then he wants to go to Vegas again. And now he knows that when he goes to Vegas and loses money, you're bailing him out. So it's kind of like Luigi's going to Las Vegas, this time with your credit card. That's not, Luigi going to Vegas with your credit card is not a great idea. So what do you do? Well, why don't you send another relative along to watch Luigi and give him some rules? No double on 16 or whatever it is. Well, you know how well that's going to work, right? Instead, let them gamble with their own money, and then you don't need it. You can do something very simple. Gamble with your own money, and then we don't need to watch. Taxes. The sad argument is tax more, tax less. So how do we get out of that argument that's going nowhere? Number one is the obscene complexity of our tax code that needs to be fixed. I think left and right can agree on that. I think that the problem with taxes is we try to mix what the tax rates will be, how much total revenue we'll raise, how do we subsidize all sorts of activities, and how do we transfer income? So if you split those apart, have just a tax code to raise money, put subsidies on budget and discuss those separately, fill in the rates later on, and redistribute income separately, I think we'd get somewhere. So we need, I think Mr. Trump's taxes that are in the news, what's the real lesson of that? The real lesson of that is that it's just obscenely complicated, and it is eroding the fabric of our democracy. Because we all kind of understand that once you get into the $100 million range, there's a special set of rules, and that's got to stop. So very simple, and let's stop talking about the rates. Let's just talk about the complexity. Fix the structure. Let Bernie Sanders write the rates. I can even say that because in the end, the tax rate is going to be whatever the government spends. So if the government is spending too much and you try to raise 70% taxes, well then, you're piling up the money the tax rate's good. Labor laws, it's funny, the government says they want jobs and then they make hiring somebody an incredibly difficult proposition. So let's make it easier to hire people. Social programs, there's a tired conversation of we need to spend more, we need to spend less. Oh, you're heartless, you want to kick grandma off a cliff. Oh, you're selling our children's inheritance by borrowing money from the Chinese. We got to get out of that, right? How do we get out of that? The real problem with social programs, we can spend more to spend less. The problem with social programs is their incentives. Who are the highest taxed Americans? Poor people. If you are a poor person in this country, when you earn $1, you can easily lose $1.10 or $1.20 or even $500 worth of benefits. The cliffs where you, for example, lose your Obamacare subsidies, losing your child care subsidy, losing your food stamps, all of these things reduce your benefits in proportion to how much you earn, and that tends to trap people. So if you spend a little more to remove those traps, people would get out, and that's great for both sides. I don't think even the most liberal doesn't want a world in which people sit living on checks for the rest of their lives. We want opportunity to get people out. Okay, I have to say this because it's so unpopular. Immigration and trade are great for the country. And if you don't like immigration, then the number one thing you can do about it is to buy what people want to sell you so they don't have to move here in order to make a living. So they're interrelated, and they are great for the country. Education is a big problem in this country, and the answer is not another 10,000-page bill. Give parents the money and then let them go. And then last, I have to put in a special plug for state and local. We focus on presidential politics, we focus on the election, we focus on Washington, but in fact, many of our problems are at the state level and local level. I'm trying to rehab a house in Palo Alto, so I now have some experience with state and local bureaucracy. It is now 8 months into the process, and we are finally next month going to be allowed to apply for our building permit. And these have big effects. As we know, zoning laws drive up property values. That makes inequality worse. That makes it harder for poor people to move from bad neighborhoods to go get those good jobs in good neighborhoods because they can't afford to live anywhere nearby. These are state and local problems. And so one of the reasons I'm such a fan of Show Me is that under the radar screen you can have a much bigger effect. Everybody yells about Washington, but state and local is where. So I don't think it's hopeless. People just say, oh, this is hopeless. What we need is a grand bargain, and the grand bargain's kind of on the table. You give up yours, you give up yours, you give up yours, you give up yours, and we'll all come out better in the end. That's what great leadership does. It was done in the 1980s. It can be done again. Trying to look for a good economic word for all this. Trickle down is a terrible word because that's not how it works. Maybe incentive economics is the right. Back to taxes. It does not matter to economics. You have to be honest and say it does not matter how much money people pay in taxes. What matters is at the margin, if you earn an extra dollar, how much of that extra dollar do you get to do? That's what drives growth. We can come to a bargain where you pay more, so long as, and keep a liberal happy, so long as the margin where that extra dollar isn't distorted. Incentives are the answers. Okay, I have talked too long. I should take some questions.